They expected the war to be won by Christmas, but instead the Allied invasion was about to die. Armies were running on nothing. Men were starving. They had no bullets. Then they heard engines in the distance. August 1944. Somewhere in France, 200 miles from the nearest supply depot. American tank crews are doing something they never thought they'd have to do. They're siphoning gas from their own vehicles to give to other tanks, so at least some of them can keep moving. Artillery units are rationing shells. Infantry soldiers are on half rations. The Third Army, the most aggressive and successful American force in Europe, is grinding to a halt. Not because the Germans stopped them, because they literally ran out of fuel. General George Patton is furious. His army just chased the Germans across France faster than anyone thought possible. They could be in Germany by next week. They could end the war by Christmas. But instead, his tanks are sitting still because there's no gas. And the reason there's no gas is because the Allied supply system was never designed for this. Nobody planned for success this big. Nobody thought an army could move this fast. And now, in August 1944, the Allies are facing a crisis that could lose them the war they just won. Unless someone figures out how to move 12,500 tons of supplies 400 miles every single day using trucks that keep breaking down, drivers who haven't slept in days, and roads that were never meant for this kind of traffic. This is the story of the Red Ball Express, the most desperate logistics operation in military history, and the mostly black truck drivers who saved the Allied advance by refusing to stop driving, even when their trucks were falling apart and they were falling asleep at the wheel. Let's rewind to June 6, 1944. D-Day. The Allies land in Normandy and establish a beachhead. The invasion works. By the end of June, over 1 million Allied soldiers are in France. The plan now is to break out of Normandy and push east toward Germany. But there's a problem that's been obvious since day one. Logistics. The Allied planners knew supply would be difficult. They built those artificial mulberry harbors specifically because they knew they'd need a way to get massive amounts of supplies ashore. But even with the mulberry harbors working, there's a fundamental problem. All the supplies are coming through Normandy. All the food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, spare parts, everything. It's all being unloaded on beaches in Normandy. And then it has to be transported to wherever the armies are fighting. In June and July, this isn't a huge problem because the armies aren't that far from Normandy. The front lines are maybe 20 or 30 miles inland. Trucks can make the round trip in a day. But the plan is to push much farther. The plan is to liberate all of France, cross the Rhine River, and invade Germany. That means the front lines will eventually be hundreds of miles from the beaches. And every mile the armies advance, the supply lines get longer, the trucks have to drive farther, the fuel has to travel farther, everything takes longer and uses more resources. The army has a formula for this. They know exactly how much stuff an army needs. One American division in combat requires about 500 tons of supplies per day. Food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, replacement equipment. 500 tons per day per division. The Third Army has 12 divisions. That's 6,000 tons per day just for Patton's forces. The First Army needs even more. Add in the British and Canadian forces, and you're talking about needing to move 20,000 tons of supplies every single day from Normandy to the front lines. 20,000 tons every day! That's the weight of 200 blue whales, or 4,000 elephants, or about 40 million pounds. Every single day, the Allies need to move 40 million pounds of stuff from the beaches to armies that are constantly moving farther away. And in 1944, there's only one way to do that. Trucks. The problem is trucks aren't unlimited. The Allied armies have thousands of trucks, but they're spread out doing different jobs. Some are assigned to specific divisions and move with them. Some are hauling supplies from beaches to forward supply depots. Some are carrying ammunition. Some are transporting wounded soldiers back to hospitals. Every truck is needed for something. And none of them were supposed to be driving 400-mile round trips every single day. In late July 1944, the situation is manageable but tight. The armies are pushing out of Normandy slowly. Supply lines are getting longer, but it's nothing catastrophic. Then everything changes. Operation Cobra, July 25, 1944. The Americans launch a massive attack to break out of Normandy. It works, better than anyone expected. The German lines collapse. American forces pour through the gap. Within days, they're advancing 20, 30, sometimes 40 miles per day. The Germans are retreating. The whole Western Front is collapsing. This is exactly what the Allies wanted. The breakout is happening. France is being liberated. The war might actually end soon. But there's a problem. The armies are now moving faster than the supply system can handle. Patton's Third Army is particularly aggressive. They're racing east, capturing towns, bypassing German strongholds, moving at speeds that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. By mid-August, Patton's tanks are 200 miles from Normandy. By late August, they're approaching 300 miles from the beaches. And suddenly, the supply situation goes from tight to catastrophic. Here's why. A truck carrying supplies from Normandy to the front lines now has to drive 300 miles one way. That's 600 miles round trip, on roads that are crowded with military traffic, roads that are damaged from bombing and fighting, roads that pass through recently captured towns where bridges might be destroyed. A trip that should take 12 hours is taking 24 hours, sometimes longer. And while that truck is making its 600-mile journey, it's burning fuel, lots of fuel. Fuel that isn't reaching the front lines because it's being burned by the truck carrying it. The math stops working. The armies are consuming fuel faster than it can be delivered. By late August 1944, American forces are burning through 800,000 gallons of gasoline every day. That's not a typo. 800,000 gallons per day, just in fuel. The First and Third Armies are each consuming about 400,000 gallons daily. Every tank, every truck, every jeep needs gas. And all of that gas has to be trucked from Normandy. Patton is going crazy. His tanks are the best in the world. His soldiers are winning every fight. The Germans are running scared. He could be in Germany in 2 weeks if he just had fuel. But instead, his tanks are sitting still. Some tank crews are siphoning gas from vehicles to keep others moving. Artillery units are being told to conserve ammunition. Patton is personally calling anyone who'll listen, demanding more fuel. He's screaming at logistics officers. He's threatening people. He's doing everything he can. But there's just not enough trucks to move the fuel fast enough. And it's not just Patton. The First Army under General Hodges is having the same problem. Montgomery's British forces are struggling too. The entire Allied advance is about to stall. After chasing the Germans across France, after winning battle after battle, the Allies are about to stop moving. Not because they're being defeated, because they're running out of gas. This is the crisis. And in late August 1944, a group of American officers get together for an emergency 36-hour planning session. They need to figure out how to fix this before the momentum is completely lost. Because if the armies stop now, the Germans will have time to reorganize, time to build new defensive lines, time to prepare for the Allied advance. The war could drag on for another year. Maybe more. Someone suggests creating a dedicated truck convoy. Take trucks from wherever you can find them. Put them all on one route. Have them drive 24 hours a day, carrying nothing but fuel and ammunition to the front lines. No stops, no delays. just constant movement. It's a crazy idea. It's never been done before. But what choice do they have? The plan comes together fast. They're going to create a one-way truck route from Normandy to the front lines. All military traffic only. Civilian vehicles banned. The route will be clearly marked with signs, and every truck will have a red circle painted on it. A red ball. That's a railroad term. When trains need to move freight urgently, they red ball it, which means it gets priority over everything else. So this truck convoy will be called the Red Ball Express. The route is planned out. It'll run from Normandy eastward through recently liberated towns. Different roads for the loaded trucks heading to the front and the empty trucks heading back. This keeps traffic flowing in both directions without trucks getting stuck behind each other. Military police will control all intersections to keep convoys moving. Red Ball trucks get priority over everything. Even generals have to wait if a Red Ball convoy is passing. Now they need trucks. Thousands of them. They pull trucks from every unit that can spare them. Supply companies, artillery units, engineer battalions. Anyone with trucks that aren't absolutely critical gets them reassigned to Red Ball. They end up with nearly 6,000 vehicles, GMC 2.5-ton cargo trucks mostly. Sturdy, reliable trucks that can carry heavy loads. But 6,000 vehicles need 6,000 drivers. Actually, they need 12,000 drivers because the trucks will be running 24 hours a day in 2 shifts. Here's where the story gets complicated. And important. The vast majority of Red Ball Express drivers are black soldiers. In 1944, the American military is segregated. Black soldiers and white soldiers serve in separate units. Black soldiers are mostly assigned to support roles. Truck companies, quartermaster units, supply battalions. They're not allowed in most combat roles. This isn't because they're not capable. It's because of racism. Pure and simple. The army doesn't trust black soldiers to fight alongside white soldiers. So they put them in jobs the army considers less important, like driving trucks. But now, in August 1944, those truck drivers are suddenly the most important soldiers in the European theater. The entire Allied advance depends on them. If they can't move enough supplies, the war effort stalls. So the army takes these black truck companies that they'd previously considered support troops and gives them the most critical mission imaginable. Keep the front lines supplied. Keep the armies moving. Don't stop for anything. Around 75% of Red Ball Express drivers are black soldiers. Thousands of men from truck companies that had been doing routine supply runs. Now they're being told to drive round trips of 600 to 800 miles, to drive day and night without rest, to keep moving even when they're exhausted, even when their trucks are breaking down, even when they can barely keep their eyes open. And they're told that if they fail, the war could be lost. The Red Ball Express officially starts operation on August 25, 1944. The first convoys roll out from Normandy. Each truck is loaded with 5 tons of supplies, mostly fuel in jerry cans, some ammunition, some food rations. The trucks are marked with a red circle painted on the cab and hood. Red Ball. Priority movement. And they start driving. The route is about 400 miles one way from the main supply depots in Normandy to the forward supply points near the front lines. On good roads with light traffic, that would take maybe 8 to 10 hours. But these aren't good roads, and traffic is constant. And the trucks are loaded heavy, so the trips take longer, much longer. A round trip often takes 54 hours or more. That's over 2 full days and nights of nearly constant driving. The plan is for each truck to make 1 round trip. Then the driver rests while a relief driver takes the truck on the next trip. But in practice, that doesn't happen. There aren't enough relief drivers. The trucks are needed too urgently. So drivers end up making multiple trips back to back. One driver finishes a 54-hour round trip, and instead of resting, he's told to load up and go again. They're getting maybe a few hours of sleep between trips, sometimes less. And it's not just exhausting. It's dangerous. These trucks are driving on roads damaged by bombing and combat. Some roads have potholes big enough to swallow a wheel. Some bridges are partially destroyed and trucks have to creep across, hoping they don't collapse. The trucks themselves are overloaded. They're supposed to carry 5 tons, but they're often loaded with 7 or 8 tons because every trip needs to count. This extra weight puts massive stress on engines, transmissions, and brakes. The trucks keep breaking down. Engines overheat. Transmissions fail. Tires blow out. Red Ball mechanics are stationed along the route trying to fix vehicles as fast as possible. But they're overwhelmed. There aren't enough spare parts. There aren't enough mechanics. Trucks are constantly being pushed past their limits. Some mechanics start removing the governors from engines. The governor is a device that limits top speed to prevent engine damage. Remove it, and the truck can go faster. It'll also break down faster, but that's a problem for later. Right now, speed is everything. Drivers are falling asleep at the wheel. Exhaustion is a constant problem. Even with 2-man crews, both drivers often end up so tired they can barely function. There are accidents. Trucks run off the road. Trucks crash into each other. Some drivers fall asleep and don't wake up until their truck is in a ditch. The Army tries to enforce rest periods, but there's too much pressure to keep moving. Commanders need supplies now, not tomorrow. So drivers keep driving even when they can barely see straight. And then there's the nighttime driving. German aircraft occasionally patrol the roads. If a convoy is spotted, it could be strafed or bombed. So night convoys have to drive without headlights. In total darkness. Following the dim taillights of the truck ahead. On damaged roads. While exhausted. It's incredibly dangerous. Drivers are trained to maintain a specific distance from the truck ahead, close enough to see the taillights but far enough to avoid crashing if something goes wrong. But when you're exhausted and can barely see, that's almost impossible. Accidents happen constantly. Despite all of this, the Red Ball Express works. By early September, they're moving 12,500 tons of supplies per day. That's £25 million every day, from Normandy to armies that are now 400 miles away. It's an incredible achievement. The trucks keep rolling. The supplies keep flowing. Patton's tanks get fuel. The advance continues. But the system is breaking. The pace is unsustainable. Drivers are collapsing from exhaustion. Trucks are falling apart. The accident rate is climbing. Something has to change. But what? The armies still need supplies. The front lines are still moving farther away. If anything, the problem is getting worse, not better. September 1944. The Red Ball Express has been running for about 2 weeks. They're moving enough supplies to keep the armies advancing, but barely. The entire system is held together by tired drivers, pushing themselves past human limits, and mechanics performing miracles, keeping trucks running that should have been scrapped days ago. And then the army asks for more. Montgomery has a plan. Operation Market Garden. A bold attempt to cross the Rhine River and end the war by Christmas. But it requires massive supply support. More trucks. More fuel. More of everything. The Red Ball Express is already at its limit. Now they're being asked to do even more. The drivers keep going. What else can they do? They're soldiers. They have orders. The mission is critical. So they drive. They drive when they're so tired they can barely remember their own names. They drive when their trucks are making sounds that would make any mechanic cry. They drive when they haven't eaten a hot meal in days. They drive because if they stop, their fellow soldiers on the front lines don't get ammunition, don't get food, don't get fuel, and soldiers without supplies die. But there's something else driving them too. Pride. These black soldiers have been told their whole lives they're not as good as white soldiers. They've been given the worst jobs, the least respect, the lowest pay. They've been treated like second-class citizens in uniform. And now, suddenly, they're the most important soldiers in Europe. The entire Allied advance depends on them. Generals who wouldn't have given them the time of day before are now desperately depending on their trucks arriving on time. The drivers know this. They know they're proving something. They know every successful delivery is evidence that black soldiers can do anything white soldiers can do, that they can handle pressure, that they can be trusted with critical missions, that they're not support troops. They're the backbone of the whole operation, and they're not going to fail. They're not going to give anyone an excuse to say they weren't up to the job. So when a driver is told to make another run even though he hasn't slept in 40 hours, he does it. When a mechanic is told to fix a truck that should be scrapped, he finds a way. When a convoy commander is told to move faster, he pushes his drivers harder. They're not just delivering supplies, they're fighting racism, they're proving their worth, they're making history. But the cost is brutal. The accident rate keeps climbing. Trucks are wrecking at an alarming pace. Some crashes are minor. A truck runs off the road, gets pulled out, keeps going. Some are serious. Trucks flip. Drivers are injured. A few are killed. The army doesn't publicize this. They don't want people knowing how dangerous the Red Ball Express really is. But the drivers know. Every time they start another run, they know they might not make it back, and the trucks themselves are dying. By mid-September, hundreds of trucks are out of commission. Broken engines, cracked transmissions, worn-out brakes. The mechanics are cannibalizing parts from the worst trucks to keep others running. But there's a limit to how long this can continue. You can't run trucks 24 hours a day at overweight capacity on bad roads without consequences. The fleet is disintegrating. Supply officers start looking for alternatives. Can they get more trucks from somewhere? Can they repair the broken ones faster? Can they find a shorter route? The answer to all of these questions is basically no. There are no spare trucks. Repairs are already happening as fast as possible, and the route is already the shortest one that avoids areas where fighting is still happening. The only real solution is to wait until ports closer to the front lines are captured and repaired. Cherbourg was captured, but heavily damaged. It's being fixed, but it'll take months to get it fully operational. Other ports are still in German hands. Until the Allies can start bringing supplies through ports closer to where the fighting is, the Red Ball Express has to keep running. There's no choice. Meanwhile, Patton is still complaining about fuel. He's convinced that if he just had unlimited gas, he could race to Berlin and end the war in weeks. He's probably right. His Third Army is destroying every German unit it encounters. But he's not getting unlimited gas. He's getting exactly as much as the Red Ball Express can deliver, which is a lot, but it's not unlimited. So his advance is slower than he wants. And he blames the supply troops. This creates tension. Combat soldiers on the front lines sometimes look down on support troops. Truck drivers, supply clerks, mechanics. The guys who aren't in direct combat. There's an attitude that real soldiers fight and support troops just help, which is ridiculous because without the support troops, the combat troops would be dead in a week. But the attitude exists. And now you've got black truck drivers working themselves to death to keep predominantly white combat units supplied. And some of those combat soldiers don't even appreciate it. Some make racist comments. Some complain that their supplies are late, as if the drivers are deliberately taking their time instead of literally dying from exhaustion trying to get supplies forward. It's infuriating. The drivers are doing the impossible and they're still being disrespected, but they keep driving. Because what else are they going to do? Quit? That's not an option. They're soldiers in a war. People are depending on them. So they swallow the disrespect ignore the racism, and get back in their trucks for another 54-hour run. By late September, the situation is reaching a breaking point. The Red Ball Express has been operating for a month. They've moved over 400,000 tons of supplies. But the cost has been enormous. Hundreds of trucks are out of service. Accident rates are through the roof. Drivers are so exhausted that some are hallucinating behind the wheel. The system can't continue like this. And then, finally, there's some good news. The port of Antwerp in Belgium is captured. Antwerp is a major port, much closer to the front lines than Normandy. If they can get Antwerp operational, they can start bringing supplies through there instead of trucking everything from Normandy. It would cut the supply route in half. It would save the Red Ball Express. But there's a problem. The Germans still control the approaches to Antwerp. The Scheldt estuary, the waterway leading to the port, is held by German forces. Until that's cleared, no ships can reach Antwerp, so the Red Ball Express has to keep running. The drivers have to keep pushing themselves past their limits. The mechanics have to keep performing miracles, because there's still no alternative. This is where we are in October 1944. The Red Ball Express has been running for over a month. They've accomplished something that should have been impossible. They've kept entire armies supplied across distances that broke every logistics rule. They've done it with exhausted drivers, broken trucks, and a system that was never designed for this kind of stress. And they're still going, still driving, still delivering, still refusing to quit. But everyone knows this can't last forever. Something has to give. Either the supply routes shorten when new ports open, or the trucks completely fall apart and the system collapses. It's a race. Can they keep the Red Ball running long enough for the logistics situation to improve? Or will the whole thing come crashing down and leave the Allied armies stranded in the middle of France with no supplies? The answer to that question is going to determine how the war ends. And it's all in the hands of a few thousand exhausted truck drivers who just want to sleep but can't because there's another convoy leaving in an hour and they're on the roster again. This is the Red Ball Express, the forgotten story of the drivers who saved the war by refusing to stop, even when every part of their body was screaming at them to quit. And we're only halfway through the story. October 1944. Private First Class James Ruckard is behind the wheel of his GMC truck somewhere in France. He's been driving for 36 hours straight. His eyes feel like sandpaper. His hands are cramping from gripping the wheel. His back is screaming at him from sitting in the same position for a day and a half. But he can't stop. Because General Patton said the supplies need to be there, and when Patton says you need to be somewhere, you're there even if you have to drive all day and all night. The truck behind him is so close he can barely see around it. The truck in front is doing maybe 35 miles per hour on a road that looks like it's been chewed up by tanks. Which it has. And somewhere up ahead, American soldiers are waiting for the fuel and ammunition Ruckard is carrying. If he doesn't get there, they don't fight. If they don't fight, they die. So Ruckard keeps driving. Because that's what Red Ball Express drivers do. They drive until they physically can't anymore. And then they drive some more. Let's talk about what it's actually like to be a Red Ball Express driver in the fall of 1944. Because the statistics are impressive, but they don't capture the human experience. 12,500 tons per day, 6,000 trucks, 400 miles each way. These numbers tell you what happened, but not how it felt. You wake up after maybe 3 hours of sleep. If you're lucky, sometimes it's less. Sometimes you don't sleep at all because your truck broke down on the last run and you spent your rest period helping mechanics fix it. You grab whatever food is available, usually K rations, maybe some coffee if there's time. Then you walk to your truck. The truck is a GMC 2.5-ton cargo truck. Officially called the CCKW. Everyone just calls it a Jimmy. It's a good truck. Reliable. Strong. But it's not designed for what you're about to do with it. It's designed to carry 2.5 tons. You're about to load it with 5 tons. Maybe more. It's designed for normal road use. You're about to drive it 800 miles in the next 2 days on roads that barely qualify as roads. You do a quick inspection, check the oil, check the tires, check the brakes. If something's wrong, you report it. If it's minor, you ignore it because there's no time to fix it, and the convoy is leaving in 10 minutes. If it's major, they'll pull your truck and assign you to a different one. The convoy can't wait. Your truck gets loaded. Jerry cans full of gasoline, mostly. Each can hold 5 gallons. Your truck might be carrying 200 jerry cans. That's 1,000 gallons of highly flammable gasoline sitting 3 feet behind your head. If you crash, if something sparks, if a German plane strafes your convoy, you're riding in a bomb. But you try not to think about that. The convoy forms up. Maybe 50 trucks, maybe 100. You find your position in line, not too close to the truck ahead, but not too far. Close enough to see their tail lights at night, but far enough that if they brake suddenly, you don't rear-end them. The convoy commander gives the signal and you start moving. The first few hours aren't bad. You're relatively fresh. The road out of the supply depot is decent. Traffic is heavy but organized. Military police are at every intersection directing convoys through. You're making good time. Your truck is running well. Everything seems manageable. Then you hit the stretch of road that got bombed 2 weeks ago. Craters filled in with dirt and gravel, but the repairs are rough. Your truck bounces. The cargo shifts. You hear jerry cans clanging against each other, and you hope none of them rupture. The truck ahead slows down to navigate around a particularly bad crater. You slow down too. The truck behind you gets too close, and you can see the driver's face in your mirror. He looks as tired as you feel. You've been driving for 6 hours now. Your back is starting to hurt. You shift position trying to get comfortable. There is no comfortable. The seat is hard. The truck has no suspension to speak of. Every bump goes straight through your spine. You drink some water from your canteen. You're already thinking about the return trip, and you haven't even reached the front lines yet. Hour 10. You're somewhere in the middle of France. You passed through a town an hour ago that was liberated last week. There's still rubble in the streets. Burned-out German vehicles pushed to the side of the road. You try not to look too closely at them because sometimes there are bodies that haven't been removed yet. You focus on the truck ahead. Follow the tail lights. Keep moving. The sun is setting. Night is coming. This is when it gets dangerous. The convoy will continue driving, but without headlights. Can't risk being spotted by German aircraft. So you'll be driving in the dark, following the faint red glow of the tail lights ahead, on roads you can barely see. Your co-driver is dozing in the passenger seat. You're supposed to wake him when you get too tired and let him take over. But you know he's just as exhausted as you are. You'll let him sleep a bit longer. Hour 14. Full darkness now. You're driving by feel as much as sight. You can barely see the road. The truck ahead is a ghost. Just 2 red dots floating in the black. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. You see things that aren't there. Shadows that might be obstacles or might be nothing. You grip the wheel tighter. Stay alert. Don't fall asleep. People are depending on you. Your co-driver wakes up. He can tell you're struggling. He offers to take over. You gratefully pull to the side when the convoy stops for a break. You swap positions. He takes the wheel. You try to sleep. But sleep doesn't come easy when you're sitting in a truck full of gasoline driving through darkness in a war zone. You close your eyes anyway. Even resting them helps. Hour 20. Dawn is coming. You're back behind the wheel. Your co-driver made it through the night without incident. Now it's your turn again. You're getting close to the front. You can hear artillery in the distance. The sound of war. The thing all this is for. You're bringing fuel so tanks can move, bringing ammunition so guns can fire, bringing food so soldiers can eat. You're not pulling a trigger, but you're part of every bullet that gets fired. You reach the forward supply point. Finally, the convoy stops. Soldiers start unloading the trucks. You climb out of your cab. Your legs barely work. You've been sitting for almost a full day. You stretch. You eat something. Maybe grab 30 minutes of sleep while they unload. Then you're getting back in the truck for the return trip. The return trip is supposed to be easier because you're empty. But it's not easier because you're exhausted. You've been awake for over 24 hours now. You've driven 400 miles. And now you have to drive 400 more. Your body is shutting down. Your brain is foggy. But the convoy is leaving, and your truck needs to be in it. Hour 30. You're hallucinating. You see things on the road that aren't there. You think the truck ahead stopped, but it didn't. You're having micro-sleeps. Little moments where your brain just shuts off for a few seconds. It's terrifying. You could crash. You could kill someone. But you can't stop. The convoy doesn't stop. You drink more water. You slap yourself in the face. You do whatever it takes to stay awake. Hour 40. You're not even sure you're conscious anymore. You're operating on pure autopilot. Your hands know what to do even if your brain doesn't. Follow the truck ahead. Stay in line. Keep the speed up. Don't think about how tired you are. Don't think about sleep. Don't think about anything except the road. Hour 50. You see the supply depot ahead. You're almost back. Just a few more miles. You can make it. You have to make it. The truck ahead is weaving slightly. Their driver is just as exhausted as you are. Everyone is at their limit. But everyone is still moving. That's the Red Ball Express. You don't stop until you physically can't continue. You pull into the depot. Trip complete. You've been driving for 54 hours with maybe 4 hours of sleep total. You climb out of your truck. Your legs don't want to support you. A sergeant is there with a clipboard. He tells you to get some rest. Your next run leaves in 8 hours. 8 hours. You need about 20 hours of sleep to recover from this. You're getting 8, if you're lucky. This is what it's like. Day after day. Week after week. From August through November 1944. Thousands of drivers doing this, pushing themselves past any reasonable human limit, and they're doing it in trucks that are falling apart. Let's talk about the trucks. The GMC CCKW is a good vehicle. Under normal circumstances, it's reliable and tough. But these aren't normal circumstances. These trucks are being driven 24 hours a day. They're carrying twice their rated load. They're being driven at speeds higher than they're designed for because mechanics removed the governors. They're running on roads that destroy suspension systems. They're getting minimal maintenance because there's no time. They should be serviced every 500 miles. Some of these trucks are going 2,000 miles between services. The engines overheat constantly. The cooling systems weren't designed for sustained high-speed operation with overweight loads. Drivers learn to watch their temperature gauges constantly. If it gets too hot, you're supposed to stop and let it cool down. But stopping means falling behind the convoy. So drivers push it. They risk engine damage rather than fall behind. Some engines seize up and die. The truck gets pushed to the side of the road, and a mechanic will try to fix it later. Transmissions are failing at an alarming rate. The constant shifting, the heavy loads, the rough roads. Transmissions are complex mechanical devices with lots of parts that can break. And they're breaking. Gears strip out. Clutches burn out. When a transmission fails, the truck is basically dead. It has to be towed back to a maintenance depot where mechanics will either rebuild it or cannibalize it for parts. Brakes are a constant problem. The trucks are heavy, and the brakes aren't designed for this kind of sustained use. Brake pads wear out. Brake lines rupture. Drivers learn to use engine braking and downshift to save their brakes as much as possible. But sometimes you need to stop quick, and the brakes just aren't there. That's when accidents happen. Tires are wearing out faster than they can be replaced. Each truck has 6 tires, 2 in front, 4 in back. When a tire blows, you're supposed to replace it immediately. But there aren't enough spare tires. So drivers are running on worn tires that are one pothole away from blowing out. Some trucks are running on tires that are so bald the canvas is showing through. It's dangerous, but there's no choice. The mechanics working on Red Ball trucks are performing miracles. They're working in field conditions with limited tools and even more limited parts. When a truck breaks down, they have to diagnose the problem, find parts somehow, and fix it as fast as possible because that truck needs to be back on the road. They're pulling parts from completely destroyed trucks to fix ones that can still be saved. They're improvising repairs that would make factory engineers cry. They're doing things that shouldn't be possible. And they're doing it under immense pressure because every truck that's not running is supplies that aren't reaching the front lines. By October 1944, the Red Ball Express has lost nearly half its original truck fleet to breakdowns, accidents, and mechanical failures. Out of the original 6,000 trucks, maybe 3,000 are still operational at any given time. The other 3,000 are either being repaired, waiting for parts, or have been cannibalized to keep others running. And those 3,000 operational trucks are trying to do the work that 6,000 trucks could barely handle. The math doesn't work, but somehow they're making it work. The drivers are getting creative too. They're learning shortcuts that aren't on any map. They're forming informal networks where drivers share information about road conditions, where the best mechanics are located, which routes are faster. They're teaching each other tricks for keeping trucks running. How to coax a few more miles out of an overheating engine. How to shift gears to minimize transmission wear. How to read the sounds your truck makes and know what's about to break before it breaks. There's a bond forming among Red Ball drivers. They're going through something nobody else understands. The exhaustion, the danger, the constant pressure. When you pass another Red Ball truck going the opposite direction, you wave, you honk, you acknowledge each other. We're all in this together. We're all suffering. We're all refusing to quit. It's a brotherhood forged in exhaustion and determination. But the racial tensions are still there. Most Red Ball drivers are black soldiers serving in segregated units. They're doing the most critical supply mission of the war, but they're still facing racism. Some are denied service at mess halls meant for white troops. Some are harassed by white MPs who don't think black soldiers should be driving priority convoys. Some are treated like servants by white officers who don't see them as real soldiers. And the irony is brutal. These black drivers are keeping white combat units supplied. They're working themselves to death so white soldiers can fight. And they're still being treated as inferior, still being disrespected, still being told they're not as good. It's infuriating. But they can't do anything about it. They're soldiers. They have orders. So they swallow their anger and get back in their trucks. There are moments, though, small moments of recognition. A white tank commander who sees a Red Ball convoy and tells his crew, "Those are the guys keeping us in this fight." A white general who personally thanks a black truck driver for getting supplies through on time. A white mechanic who works alongside black mechanics without caring about race because they're all trying to fix trucks as fast as possible. These moments are rare, but they matter. Some black soldiers see the Red Ball Express as proof of their capability. They're being given a mission that white soldiers would struggle with, and they're succeeding. They're showing that black soldiers can handle pressure, can be trusted with critical operations, can do anything required of them. After the war, some of these soldiers will use their Red Ball service as evidence that segregation in the military is wrong, that black soldiers deserve the same opportunities as white soldiers. The Red Ball Express becomes part of the argument for integration. But that's in the future. In October 1944, they're just trying to survive, just trying to keep the trucks moving, just trying to deliver one more load of supplies before they collapse from exhaustion. And then, finally, there's a breakthrough. Early November 1944, the Scheldt estuary is cleared of German forces. The port of Antwerp can finally be opened. Ships can sail directly to Antwerp and unload supplies there. Antwerp is 200 miles closer to the front lines than Normandy. This changes everything. The pressure on the Red Ball Express immediately decreases. Suddenly, they don't need to move as much because supplies are being brought through Antwerp. The routes get shorter. The round trips take less time. Trucks aren't being pushed as hard. Drivers can actually get some rest. The whole system starts to stabilize. On November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express is officially shut down. It's been running for 83 days. In those 83 days, they moved 412,193 tons of supplies. That's over £824 million. They made approximately 6,000 trips. They kept entire armies supplied across impossible distances. And they did it with determination, creativity, and a refusal to accept failure. The final numbers are staggering. The Red Ball Express averaged moving 12,500 tons of supplies per day for nearly 3 months. At peak operation, they had convoys running 20 hours per day. They transported enough gasoline to drive around the Earth 200 times. They moved enough ammunition to fight a major battle every single day. They kept the Allied advance moving when it should have stalled. Without the Red Ball Express, the war in Europe might have lasted another year. But the cost was enormous. Hundreds of trucks were destroyed. Thousands more were damaged beyond economic repair. The accident rate during Red Ball operations was over 10 times normal. Dozens of drivers were killed in accidents. Hundreds more were injured. Some drivers suffered permanent health problems from the extreme exhaustion and stress. Some had psychological trauma from the constant pressure and danger. And for decades, nobody knew about it. The Red Ball Express wasn't publicized during the war for security reasons. After the war, it was mostly forgotten. The combat units got the glory. The tank crews and infantry soldiers were celebrated as heroes. The truck drivers went home quietly. Most people never heard of the Red Ball Express. The racial dynamics made it even less likely to be remembered. In 1944, America, celebrating black soldiers for critical war contributions, didn't fit the narrative many white Americans wanted to believe. The military was segregated because many white people believed black soldiers couldn't perform as well as white soldiers. The Red Ball Express proved that belief wrong, so it was easier to just not talk about it. Some of the drivers tried to tell their stories. They'd talk about their service, about driving 400 miles with no sleep, about keeping Patton's army supplied, about the convoys and the danger and the exhaustion. But people didn't want to hear it. Truck driving didn't sound heroic. It sounded boring. Support work, not real combat. The drivers would explain that without them, the combat troops would have died. But that message didn't stick. It wasn't until decades later that historians started looking closely at World War II logistics, started understanding how critical supply operations were, started researching the Red Ball Express and realizing what an incredible achievement it was. And even then, it took a long time for the story to reach popular consciousness. In 1992, a historical marker was placed in France, commemorating the Red Ball Express route. In 2019, a documentary was made about the drivers. Slowly, the story started to get told. Some of the surviving drivers were finally recognized for what they'd accomplished. But by then, most of them were dead. They never got the recognition they deserved during their lifetimes. Let's talk about some individual drivers. Because the statistics are impressive, But the individual stories are what really matter. Private William Scott was 19 years old when he joined the Red Ball Express. He'd been driving trucks in a regular supply unit when his company got reassigned to Red Ball. He later said the first few runs almost broke him. The exhaustion was unlike anything he'd experienced, but he learned to push through it. He developed techniques for staying awake. He'd sing to himself. He'd talk to his co-driver constantly. He'd drink massive amounts of coffee. He made over 30 round trips during the 83 days of Red Ball operations. After the war, he became a long-haul truck driver. He said nothing in civilian trucking ever compared to the intensity of Red Ball. Sergeant James Thompson was a convoy commander. He was responsible for making sure his 50-truck convoy stayed together and reached its destination on time. He later described it as the most stressful job he ever had. If one truck broke down, he had to decide whether to stop the whole convoy or leave it behind. If the convoy got separated, he had to figure out how to get everyone back together. If they were running late, he had to push his drivers harder, even though they were already at their limits. He said he aged 10 years during those 83 days. Private Charles Stevenson was a mechanic. He worked at a repair point along the Red Ball route. He said trucks would come in so broken it seemed impossible to fix them. But they had to fix them because the convoy couldn't wait. He'd work 18-hour shifts trying to keep trucks operational. He got good at diagnosis. He could hear an engine and know what was wrong. He could look at how a truck was driving and identify transmission problems. He became an expert at improvising repairs with whatever parts were available. After the war, he owned an auto repair shop. He said fixing civilian cars was easy compared to keeping Red Ball trucks running. Corporal George Watson was a driver who was killed in an accident in September 1944. His truck hit a crater that had been hidden by darkness. The truck flipped. The jerry cans of gasoline ruptured and caught fire. Watson was trapped in the burning wreckage. Other drivers stopped and tried to save him, but the fire was too intense. Watson was 23 years old. He's buried in an American cemetery in France. His family didn't learn the details of his death until years later. They were just told he died in an accident during supply operations. They had no idea he was part of the Red Ball Express, or what that meant. These are the real people behind the statistics. Young men, mostly black, mostly from poor backgrounds, who were asked to do something impossible and did it anyway. Who drove until they couldn't drive anymore and then kept driving. Who risked their lives not in combat, but in the unglamorous work of logistics. Who proved that war is won not just by the soldiers who fight, but by the soldiers who make sure the fighters have what they need. The legacy of the Red Ball Express is complicated. On one hand, it was an incredible logistical achievement. It kept the Allied advance moving. It proved that determined soldiers could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. On the other hand, it was built on exploitation. Taking mostly black soldiers and pushing them beyond human limits because the army knew they'd do it without complaining. Using them for the most critical mission while still treating them as second class. Celebrating their achievement after the fact while forgetting about them during their lifetimes. The Red Ball Express also revealed fundamental flaws in Allied logistics planning. The fact that they needed to create such a desperate operation showed that someone had miscalculated badly. The supply system should have been able to handle the advance. The fact that it couldn't meant the planners had made mistakes. They'd assumed the advance would be slower. They'd assumed ports would be captured and opened faster. They'd assumed a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. And when their assumptions failed, they didn't have a backup plan. They had to improvise the Red Ball Express as an emergency measure. But maybe that's not fair criticism. Maybe it's impossible to plan perfectly for war. Maybe the Allied planners did the best they could with the information available. And when things didn't go according to plan, they adapted. They created the Red Ball Express, They found a way to keep the armies supplied. They solved the problem. Isn't that what matters? The broader lesson from the Red Ball Express is about logistics. Modern armies run on fuel and ammunition. They need constant resupply. Without supplies, even the best trained, best equipped army will grind to a halt within days. The Germans learned this the hard way in Russia. They advanced faster than their supply lines could support, and ended up stranded in the middle of winter with no fuel and no food. The Allies almost learned the same lesson in France. They were saved by the Red Ball Express. Today, military logistics is much more sophisticated. The US military has massive supply chains. They have cargo planes that can deliver supplies anywhere in the world. They have satellite tracking of every shipment. They have computers that optimize routes and predict needs. They have redundancy built into every system. But even with all that technology, logistics is still hard, still critical, still the thing that determines whether military operations succeed or fail. The Red Ball Express was logistics at its most basic. Trucks, roads, drivers, no computers, no satellites, just men pushing themselves to their absolute limits to move supplies from point A to point B. And it worked. Not perfectly, not without cost. But it worked. The armies stayed supplied. The advance continued. The war was won. If you want to understand how World War II was really won, you have to look beyond the battles, beyond the tanks and planes and famous generals. You have to look at the thousands of supply trucks driving through the night. You have to see the exhausted drivers falling asleep at the wheel, but forcing themselves to stay awake. You have to understand the mechanics working miracles with broken trucks and no parts. You have to recognize the unglamorous, unheralded work that makes everything else possible. The Red Ball Express wasn't the biggest battle of World War II. It wasn't the most dramatic moment. Nobody made a blockbuster movie about it. But it was absolutely critical. Without it, Patton's tanks would have run out of gas. The Allied advance would have stalled. The war might have dragged on for another year. Tens of thousands more people would have died. Maybe hundreds of thousands. The Red Ball Express prevented that. The drivers who pushed themselves past human limits prevented that. And most of them were black soldiers. Soldiers who weren't allowed to fight alongside white soldiers. Soldiers who were given the worst assignments because the army didn't trust them with better ones. Soldiers who faced racism every single day. Those soldiers saved the Allied advance. Those soldiers kept the war moving. Those soldiers proved they were just as capable, just as brave, just as committed as any white soldier. They proved it by driving, by refusing to quit, by doing the impossible. It took decades for their story to be told properly. It took even longer for them to be recognized. Most of them died before anyone acknowledged what they'd accomplished. That's the tragedy. Not that they succeeded. They did succeed. The tragedy is that they succeeded against impossible odds, saved the war effort, and were forgotten by the country they served. But their story deserves to be remembered. The Red Ball Express was 83 days of the most intense logistics operation in military history. It was thousands of trucks driven by exhausted men on terrible roads carrying critical supplies to armies that desperately needed them. It was mechanics performing miracles. It was convoy commanders making impossible decisions. It was young soldiers pushing themselves past any reasonable limit because they knew people were depending on them. It was also racism and exploitation. It was taking advantage of soldiers who had no choice but to obey orders. It was pushing black soldiers to their breaking point while still treating them as inferior. It was succeeding because of their determination and then forgetting about them afterward. That's part of the story too. The complicated, ugly part that's hard to talk about but important to remember. The Red Ball Express was both a triumph and a tragedy. A triumph of logistics and human determination, a tragedy of racism and forgotten sacrifice. It was both things at once, and that's what makes it such an important story to tell. Because real history is complicated, real people are complicated. The Red Ball Express was messy and imperfect and flawed and absolutely critical. 83 days, 412,000 tons, 6,000 trucks, 12,000 drivers, most of them black. All of them exhausted. All of them refusing to quit. All of them doing something that should have been impossible. All of them part of the reason the Allies won World War II. All of them deserving recognition they never received. That's the Red Ball Express, the convoy that saved the war, the drivers who wouldn't stop, the forgotten heroes who drove through exhaustion and danger and racism to keep the Allied armies moving forward. They deserve to be remembered. Their story deserves to be told. Their story deserves to be told. And now you know it. The next time someone talks about how World War II was won, tell them about the Red Ball Express. Tell them about the truck drivers who saved Patton's advance. Tell them about the mechanics who kept impossible trucks running. Tell them about the mostly black soldiers who proved their capability by refusing to fail. Tell them the story of the men who won the war by driving trucks, because that's a story worth remembering. If you want to learn how the Allies narrowly avoided certain death, click the video on screen now.